Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Youier podcast. I am your host, Elle Edwards, founder of Youier and the Blue House. And today's episode, What's Your Thing? This is one episode of all of them that I'm particularly passionate about because I lost a number of months, if not a good year or more of my life to thing finding. And so whilst this episode will have some questions that you can explore, some things to think about, ultimately, your takeaway for this episode is that your thing ultimately is to be you in relationship with God. It's what we call Youier. And so I make no apology about the fact that, yes, we can get practical. Yes, there are things we can explore. But ultimately, your thing is to be you. Now, I know that me telling you, your thing is to be you, you might be like, well, I don't know who I am. How do I figure that piece out? And so that's why we do have these questions, these prompts, these pieces to explore. But I just want to, from the get-go, add this reminder that ultimately I don't want you getting stuck spiraling in thing finding. Sometimes the easiest way to figure out who you are is actually to try something, to move forward and take action. And so with that caveat in place, it's that reminder that, the verses that we've explored before about you being fearfully and wonderfully made, that's from the Psalms, where it talks about Ephesians 2:10, where it talks about that you are God's workmanship, sometimes translated as his work of art. And you were created in God's mind, in God's imagination, in God's knowing. Before he laid the foundations of the world, he created you with a plan and a purpose. So whilst there might be some exploration and some thing finding to do, everything that you discover and unpack, none of it is news to God. None of it, as we've explored before, you're not an accident. You were created very deliberately. That's a word that fell out of my mouth strangely. You were created very deliberately. That's the word I was going for. Deliberately, you were created deliberately on purpose and for a purpose. And so, yes, there will be some exploration to do along the way. And that's okay. That can be fun. Don't forget to approach this with a sense of adventure and joy and unpacking and discovering who you are. But don't forget, all of this is to be done in relationship with God. It's the IER in Youier, intentional, expectant relationship. And so really the secret sauce or the added ingredient to all of this is, as you go through your exploration, do it with God. And, there are so many quizzes on the internet, from, more serious things like Strength Finders and the DISC personality test to things like, which Harry Potter house am I in? It's not an accident that there are so many personality quizzes and tests and, paths that you can go down. It's because we want to know who we are, and we can get stuck in this sort of perpetual cycle. If you take those tests, if you do this journey with God, you can then go, okay, I'm learning that this test says this, and this about me. Help me unpack this. Show me what this means from your perspective. So another one that comes to mind is Myers-Briggs is one that people like. The Enneagram is another one. There are so many different quizzes and tests that we can do. And they have value. Please hear my heart on this. I'm not criticizing personality tests. I like doing them. They're quite good fun because they can help you to know yourself a little bit better. They can help you go, oh, that's the reason why I react the way I do to this thing. Or one of the pieces with the Enneagram, one of the things I like about it, with the heads up and the caveat that I am not an expert on the Enneagram, but I have explored it a little bit, and we've got our spiritual director in the Blue House is big on the Enneagram, and so we've had conversations about this. One of the things I like about the Enneagram is it shows you the mature and the immature versions of yourself. I don't know if that's the language that is actually used by the people that created the Enneagram. Forgive me if it's not. But it helps you to notice that when you're reacting in a certain way, this is me reacting in a way that, maybe there's some room for growth there. So all that to say, these things can be really helpful. They are tools to help you know yourself better. But I would maintain that none of these things are to be done in isolation. If you take your results, okay, God, what do you say about this? And then ask Holy Spirit, okay, those times when I'm reacting in this way because of the way that I've been created, help me to navigate this in a way that is moving me closer to your best for me. So with that sort of baseline caveat put in place, when I was exploring this topic with Holy Spirit, I did have a few different prompts and things that came up. So I would encourage you potentially to to start exploring this, maybe it can be something that you can do as a journaling exercise. With that reminder, if you haven't already started journaling with Holy Spirit, I would encourage you to do that. And if you need help with that, get yourself a copy of the Youier book. Blue House members, it's in the Blue House library. If you're not a member of the Blue House, sign up for the Love Notes, youier.com/love notes. You'll see at the bottom of every Love Notes email, there's a link where you can download your free copy of the Youier book. And if you don't want to do either of those things, go onto Amazon and search Youier. The reason I mention that is because I unpack for you very easily and very succinctly, I would like to say. It's not a big book. You can read the whole book in a day, really. I mean, the second part of it is a 21-day exploration, so you might not want to read it in a day, but you could if you wanted to. But it unpacks for you exactly what I mean by journaling with Holy Spirit. What does this look like? How do we do this thing? So that said, if it's brand new to you, if it's something you've not done before, I mean, I didn't start journaling with God until, I want to say, April 2020, and I was 40-ish by then. I'd spent the first 40 years of my life, really, I'm not somebody that kept a diary. I like the idea of keeping a diary, but I used to forget to fill it in, quite honestly, if I'm going to be transparent. So even if you're someone who's like, oh, I've never really got on with journaling with God is a completely different experience. It's so much more fun. I'm just being reminded by Holy Spirit right now. I did do morning pages for a time as well. The difference is, for me personally, with morning pages, I tended to get a bit sort of like, I'm writing this thing because, the book says I should write this many words. I really don't know what to say. It becomes just this internal dialogue, which I understand is the point of it. But when you're journaling with Holy Spirit, that's very different. And so I would encourage you, if you've never done it, give it a try, and that resource is there to help you do that. So with that said, these are these prompts. These are things to notice. So I'm going to sort of just read what I have for you, and we'll unpack it and see where we go from there. So one of the questions is, what are you passionate about? What are those things that you get really excited about, geeky about, you could talk about forever and never get tired of? Or another way to look at this is, what if you were going to give a keynote speech or a TED talk, what would it be on? What is that thing that you're so excited about that you could talk about it all day? Maybe there's something you get excited about that if someone gets you on that topic, you do talk about it all day. And remember, there might not just be one thing. You are not sort of single, a 2D flat image. You are multifaceted. You are brilliant and wonderful. There'll be many things that you're passionate about. Notice them, pay attention, write them all down. And then one of those things that come naturally to you, those things that maybe you do almost without thinking, they're so automatic. So one of the things for me now is silver lining spotting. I did not spend all of my life as a silver lining spotter, but having recognised that I actually don't know when I started being a silver lining spotter, quite honestly, but now it's really automatic, comes really naturally. There is this tendency, those things that come to us naturally, you will almost discount them because you'll assume that everybody else does them. Those things that you assume everybody else does because they come really easily to you, write those down. Then, another question to explore is, what would you most love to see in the world? Or a similar question to that, if you could impart a knowing into every single person in the world, what is it that you would impart into them? What is that thing that you would most love them to know or experience? But if there's something that maybe like, because you hear stories of people, they create the things that they most wanted their younger selves to have. If there's something like that you've thought of, I really wish I'd had this thing when I was younger, that's a good clue, something that is yours to share with the world. Because you can't really lead in those areas where you haven't first journeyed, shall we say. The journey that you've been on through life, all of that stuff plays into who you are today. And those are all good clues towards what it is that you're here to serve up to the world. And then finally, gifts and talents, those things that you can do. I can't think of an example off the top of my head other than talking, which is the example I use a lot. But I am somebody who finds it very easy to string her words together. Sometimes, as you will have noticed already, and even in this episode, I will fall over my words and I will pick myself back up and I will keep going because I like to demonstrate, you know what, you only get one shot at life and we don't go back and edit life. What you see is what you get. And so I'm very deliberate about, when the dogs were still around, if they were barking and actually making it so you couldn't hear what I said, that would be a different case in point because you need to be able to hear the words. But otherwise, you will notice, or maybe you've never noticed before, but you'll probably notice now, I don't really edit at all with these podcast episodes. I just tend to share as I'm led, things that come up, words fall out and sometimes go in the right order, and that's okay. That's part of the way that I believe I am gifted to show up in the world, is with that often used word that's almost become meaningless, authentically. I hate that word authenticity because it's been so overused, but it's the only word I've got in this context. I am somebody who finds it very easy to speak and talk and share what's going on. I can tell you a story from almost anything. I can make a story from almost anything. I find it really easy to make connections with people, partly because of the way my mind is wired. Those connections just, they happen naturally. Those are my examples for you. You will have your own examples. Hopefully you already know what you're gifted and talented and those things that are particular to you. If you don't, that's where those quizzes and those different tests can be really helpful. The Strength Finders is, like I say, is a really popular one. There are lots. I mean, if you Google personality tests, and actually if you want some hints and tips on where to get started, by all means leave a comment underneath where you're enjoying this episode. But I imagine that you probably have got a good grasp of what tests you might do. The ones that come to mind, Myers-Briggs, the Strength Finders, the DISC is good. There was another one that flitted across my awareness. Oh yeah, the Enneagram we talked about as well. There are many. But most importantly, as I started this episode out, I'm going to end it with that reminder. All of these things, you do them with God. When you do these, this is a practical note for you. If you do decide to do some of these questionnaires, go with your first instinct. Don't overthink, because some of them I'm like, oh, this or that, I'm really in the middle. Then be in the middle. There is a middle option. Try not to overthink it. If you're someone like me who tends to be quite optimistic, I score quite highly in lots of things. But just trust the process. Trust that the test can allow for that. But don't forget, take all of this stuff to God and say, okay, God, this is the result I'm getting. What do you say? What does this look like from your perspective? And then, how do I put this into action? So, giving you lots of things today to explore as you explore what your thing is. Don't forget my initial caveat. Your thing is ultimately to be you in relationship with God. I don't want you to get hung up on this. You can test some of this stuff out, try it out, and then walk it out. Put on what this is that the tests are telling you who you are. Explore. If there are things that you think you are gifted in, use those gifts, use those talents and see how that plays out. But have fun with it. I'm not giving you one specific plaything this episode because there's a few different pieces to this depending upon where you're at. But just trust your instinct, have fun with it, and I look forward to catching up with you in the very next episode. Oh, and if you know somebody who would benefit from this conversation about what's your thing, please share this episode with them. And finally, if you want help with this, one of the pieces that we do most beautifully inside the Blue House, other than a wonderful, safe community and fabulous conversation, is to help you explore who it is that you're created to be and do that in relationship with God. So if this resonates with you and you don't have that safe space online, I would encourage you to come and check out the Blue House, youier.com/join. That really is it with the end of my little reminders. I shall catch up with you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.